What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Daily Dish Tournament Edition. I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host, Logan Shanks. We got a very special guest next to us from the Daily Kansan.
Hi, my name's Sam Winton. I'm the sports editor for the University Daily Kansan. Happy to be here. This should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, great to have you. We will start just recapping the tournament so far. Obviously, Kansas kind of down a couple of their key players, so early exits. I guess it wasn't really surprising. If you had told me like a couple weeks ago, I'd be surprised. But, Cincinnati just kind of took a hold of kind of a crippled Kansas team.
Yeah, it's been a rough couple weeks, obviously, just super injured. I didn't expect the loss to be that bad, I'll be honest. I mean, losing by 20, especially to Cincinnati, is rough. They never really got anything going. Beginning of the second half, kind of cut into the lead. I thought, okay, maybe they can sneak out with it. Then they just did not have anything left in the tank. No one to really go to on offense. So it was a rough one. I mean, if they can get healthy by the tournament, I still think there's something left, but not the Big 12 tournament that Kansas wanted for sure.
Yeah, they definitely were lacking that just kind of offensive presence. Would have been nice to have like a McCullough on the field. And, I think, I feel like, did not hear that he will be back by the NCAA tournaments.
He should be. So should Hunter. Kevin's a lot healthier than Hunter is because he's been dealing with a bone bruise in his knee all year. But Hunter dislocated his shoulder against Houston. Yeah. Didn't need surgery, had the MRI, and everything seems okay. So hopefully he can get back too. But yeah, it's been brutal to watch. They're brutal to watch without the two of them on the floor.
Yeah, you kind of, really, I was kind of hoping that Furphy would do more. I know he's been a guy that we've at least been excited to watch, especially with Grady leaving to the NBA. But on the other hand, KJ Adams was a guy who kind of lit us up at Hilton. So I know he had a good night, but obviously you kind of need everybody to have a good night besides just one player.
Yeah, KJ is really impressive. I was impressed to see just like how much of an offensive stride he's taken this year. Last year, really good defender, doesn't really have much of an offensive game. This year, he's really used his athleticism to his advantage because he's probably one of the best athletes in the conference. And he's just able to get to the rim. He fights through contact really well. So he's been a really impressive guy. He's always so good on the defensive end, too.
Did you kind of think that going into it without Hunter or, Kevin, that this was kind of just Bill Self knowing that he was going to punt this tournament and then hopefully do well? Because going into it, I keep telling Christian, you can't, especially in the NCAA tournament, you can't count Kansas out. And I think this is just putting them kind of in the best position to at least get farther than most would expect without them.
Yeah, he talked before the tournament about wanting to get those guys healthy. He said after the game, Kevin probably could have played. Hunter definitely couldn't have. So it's really just focusing. This Big 12 tournament doesn't really matter too much for Kansas. They can't really improve their seed all that much. So just the main goal of getting them healthy by the time March Madness comes around, I think, was the biggest thing.
Yeah, and they've done enough. I think they're just, with Kansas being a blue blood and whatnot, like, again, you just can't count them out. They're probably going to upset some teams in the tournament. They're going to come out, completely different than how they came out against Cincinnati. And it's just unfortunate that that's where it's at in the season. But, I still have faith that, they're still a great team overall with those two guys back.
Yeah, and you can't count out Kansas. There's problems with this team still, but for the most part, they've beaten 3 of the top 5, top 10 teams in the country, so they've got a lot in the tank if they're fully healthy.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that I noticed with Kansas is it's like they're almost inconsistent at times because you look at them beating some of these top teams in the country, and then at the same time they'll go on the road and lose to like UCF and West Virginia, which just kind of seems weird to me.
Yeah, it's weird. Usually Kansas teams are pretty consistent, right? You know what you're going to get out of them. This time it's almost like they're going to get up for the big games. They did that against UConn. They did that against Houston. And then they go away from Allen Fieldhouse and it's like this team just forgets how to play basketball. Like they blew a 16-point lead at UCF. They blew a double-digit lead at Kansas State and then lost in overtime. So it's weird. Neutral site for March Madness. Who knows what you get from that, but yeah, I don't know. It's been a hard Kansas team to follow just because I don't know if I 100% know who they are as a team yet.
Yeah, I feel the same way with Iowa State where they play really well in Hilton. If it weren't for the BYU loss for Kansas, they would also be undefeated at home. So it's like you got two teams that are just unbelievably good at home. Houston's unbelievably good at home too. But all these teams that could be at the top of the Big 12, they'll go on the road and just like drop these random games. Like Iowa State fell to to Kansas State recently by a lot more than I think we thought they would lose by. And then, Houston obviously dropping that game early to TCU as well. It's like, it's just, I don't know if it's the competitiveness of the Big 12 this year where really any team can beat any team if they have the right environment, or if it's like, just maybe it's just that hard to win on the road, because that's what all the coaches are saying. It's just impossible to win on the road.
I really think it is just that hard to win on the road. Every team in this conference, I mean, maybe like even Oklahoma State, I mean, they picked up some wins. Like, you just can't take a night off. And I think, Kansas probably took just too many nights off on the road this year, dropped a lot more than they should.
Yeah. And we saw that from Iowa State, especially in games like when they started their Big 12 season off at Oklahoma, they just didn't really look like themselves. And then Baylor, especially, I remember just gearing up for this matchup tonight that they have. Looking back, it was like, wow, this was when Iowa State didn't really know who they were away from home. And I think really last night against Kansas State, they kind of favored from Hilton South really showing up, because I remember I looked at Christian after the Kansas State, they had their fans cheer, and then Iowa State, it sounded just like we were back at Hilton Coliseum in Ames. So I think that's really what benefited Iowa State in their matchup yesterday. And you're not always going to get that, especially in the NCAA tournament games, but I think that's just when great teams like Kansas and Iowa State, proving that they are the real teams in this conference that can win, away from home or at neutral sites.
Yeah, that was one thing I was just kind of like interested about, was like we watched the Kansas State Texas game, and just seeing the amount of Kansas State fans there, I was like, okay, this could be an issue. Maybe it's a 50-50 split during the Iowa State versus Kansas State game, but then just Iowa State fans travel so well. And that's something you see with Kansas too. It's just this Kansas City location is just so good for all these, I guess, close teams.
Yeah, it's perfect. They've extended it, which thank goodness they have, because if they move it out of Kansas City, it's just going to lose so much of the magic. Like, it's perfect. You always see Kansas or Iowa State, they usually win the tournament, and that's because, all their fans travel. It's just it's a great environment. T-Mobile's great. It's a really good spot for Big 12 basketball.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on them kind of moving the weekends separate, just moving the women's away and bringing the women's tournament into T-Mobile as well?
That was great. They definitely deserved it, and Big 12 women's basketball has been really fun. This year, or the last year, and then this year as well, I followed the Kansas women's team a lot more closely, and it's super fun. I'm glad they deserve to be in T-Mobile, and I'm glad they did.
Yeah, because I know I covered women's basketball last year when they were in Municipal, and Municipal was a great place for them, but then just seeing the amount of people come to the T-Mobile Center, obviously it's not filling up as much as the men's tournament, but still the atmosphere is still there, which is kind of what I was concerned about, is if they could bring the same atmosphere. So just seeing all the all the praise, all the hype around the women's tournament as well.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Because that was one thing, is seeing if the fans would travel, and they seem to be traveling.
Yeah.
And I think their plan was just kind of testing out this year, especially with the women's tournament. And I like that you bring that up, Sam. Just kind of, they saw that, how much love that they got moving it into T-Mobile and extending that through 2031. I think it's awesome. So, and that ties in with just Kansas and Iowa State. The teams from Kansas, they're always gonna, have their heads in the tournament, and their fans are gonna travel, and they saw that. So extending it through is gonna be awesome.
Yeah. And speaking of Kansas versus Iowa State, we can get into kind of, are there any favorite matchups you've been to, or you've at least watched between these two teams, because it has been a pretty competitive rivalry?
Yeah, I went to Hilton this year for that game. This is the first time I've been to Hilton. It was great. The atmosphere lived up to it. Growing up as a Kansas fan, my favorite KU Iowa State game is probably the Elijah Johnson game. He comes into Hilton, he scores, I think it's 39 maybe,
wow.
Something like that. Goes crazy, scores 13 points in overtime, leads them to a win. Just super fun. KU and Iowa State. Outside, I have to say K-State is probably my favorite Big 12 rivalry, just because they're the in-state school, but Iowa State is right there, and both teams are always so great. Growing up watching George Niang, guys like that, Monte Morris, just it's a really fun matchup anytime Kansas and Iowa State play.
Yeah, I was kind of a little disappointed that Iowa State didn't travel to Allen Fieldhouse this year, because just what I've heard from it and just seeing other people go there, and it's definitely one of those atmospheres that I really want to just experience, because it definitely does come in at the top of the country.
It definitely has. I'm going to be honest, this year it hasn't I mean, for a couple games, like the UConn game, obviously Houston, a couple of the other big conference games, like it lives up to the top of the top. But honestly, it's been disappointing at times. I think I don't know, maybe it's just the team not being as good. People aren't as locked in. But it can definitely get better. It hasn't been as consistently great, I feel like, this year.
Yeah, I could say the same about Hilton, too, because there's definitely been some matchups where Hilton's just like an incredible atmosphere. I mean, I think of the Kansas game, obviously the Houston game. There's when they need to show out, they show out.
Right.
But then it's like you get some of these lower teams, like obviously when Oklahoma State or West Virginia comes to town, it's kind of hard to fill the upper deck. And
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like the teams just kind of feed off the energy there, and it's very clear that if they do end up struggling at home, it's kind of because they're not really filling out the stadium.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's why you've seen Kansas in their biggest games this year have played really well. Like shot almost, I think, 70% from the floor against Houston, and that place was rocking all day. So it's like it's expected for the big games. It's almost like they have to create their own energy at times in some of the other games, which is interesting.
And it's almost kind of like a relationship that like the fans and the team have, that like they know how much the fans help them out, and that's why both Iowa State and Kansas did so well at home this year. And honestly, there's been times, I don't know if it's the same at Allen Fieldhouse, but at Hilton when the fans know that Iowa State is going down. They might go on they might go scoreless for 5 minutes. The fans go up, and that's when Iowa State goes on a run. So, I mean, kind of like you guys were talking about, it almost just like they feed off each other.
Yeah, I feel like both teams have really good, like their fan bases know a lot about basketball, which helps because I feel like they know when they need to bring some more energy. Like you said, go on a big scoring drought, or the other team makes a run, it draws it close, the crowd always just gets right back in onto its feet, and just they do a great job of bringing the energy.
Yeah, and I feel like that's almost true with like a lot of these Big 12 schools as well, although when it's at its peak, it's not really as high as like Iowa State and Kansas at home. But I mean, Iowa State has, I like that you bring up the rivalry with the in-state schools, Kansas and Kansas State. I feel like Iowa State has almost developed a rivalry with Kansas State as well this year, especially
definitely.
with Jerome Tang and stuff.
Yeah, gotta love Jerome Tang. I feel like a lot of the Big 12 schools, especially the ones that have been around for a while, are starting to develop these rivalries just because they've played so many times. Like Kansas Baylor, like they talked about that being a big rivalry, and I don't really feel like it is that much, but then you think about it, both teams have been top of the conference the last like decade or so. And they're always going at it like in the top 5, top 10. So it's just a great conference for basketball. You got great storylines all around.
Yeah, and then we got Arizona coming into next year. I mean, this conference is just going to be stacked.
It's so good for basketball.
I know.
Football will be interesting, but in terms of basketball, it's clear number one. Like
not even close.
Not even close. Yeah. And that's even with Texas and OU leaving.
The rivalries for Iowa State is kind of different because even for both basketball and football, at least what I've noticed is like they don't really have the in-state rivals that like Kansas has. So they feel like Iowa State has to create their own rivalries with like a Texas or a Kansas, because I feel like Iowa State always feels like they're out of the conversation as one of the top schools. So they're always like, okay, well, if you think we're the underdog, then we're just going to beat the top dogs. And that's why I feel like the past couple of years before, OU and Texas have left, they have created that rivalry in football where they always kind of just want to be the underdog that beats the top team.
Yeah, I love that mentality, honestly. Like every team needs to find their motivation and finding something where it's like, okay, you don't believe in us, we'll show you why you should. And that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, even speaking about football, with Texas and OU leaving, it almost leaves just like this gap on top of who might take it over. And then you have teams like Iowa State is obviously on the come up because pretty big turnaround, although they're still kind of below what I guess fans would like. But then obviously Kansas, I mean, they kind of went from almost like the laughing stock at times, especially like the start of my time at Iowa State, until these last few years where they're like an actual competitor.
Yeah, I mean, they were the worst Power 5 team in the 2010s, probably. And, I mean, they finally found the guy to be their coach. Lance Leipold is, I mean, he's one of the best program builders in college football, and he's just done, it's been a really amazing turnaround. Like, they come in, you saw it the first year. They go in and they beat Texas and Austin. Granted, it's a bad Texas team at that point. But then, next year, 6 games, make a bowl game, and then he just continues to rise and rise and rise. It's like 8 wins next year. This year, it seems like the sky's the limit, really.
Yeah.
Like, people are talking about playoffs, like Big 12 title is like an actual expectation for Kansas football, which is kind of absurd. And it's something that I didn't expect to see, especially this quickly. But, I mean, I think they have the team that could get it done.
Yeah, especially with the gap, just like the absence at the top of the Big 12 with really no clear front runner at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, Kansas could actually take that spot. I mean, we saw how well that worked out for Texas getting into the CFP, and especially the expanded CFP, that, you know, it's not out of the question. That's for sure.
It's really not. I mean, it all hinges on if Jalen Daniels stays healthy, obviously. Yeah. If he goes out in week 4, this time they don't have a Jason Bean, who's a established backup quarterback, is really good. So if he stays healthy, yeah, I can't even imagine like what this season could be like, because I'll get way too excited about it.
Yeah. And I mean, we can move back into basketball a bit, just because, I mean, we almost talked about the expansion and people leaving. I think I'm really interested to see how like the new schools kind of travel to the Big 12 tournament as well, just because that was asked to Brett Yormark the other day, is like, you're extending the relationship in Kansas City, and obviously it helps some of these like closer teams, but then you also sign teams that are like way far away from Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't know, I feel like Kansas City is just kind of like a nice central hub of like where you're pretty much going to have to fly from anywhere in the Big 12 to a certain spot. So you might as well fly to Kansas City because it's just such a great atmosphere.
Yeah, I think it's the best atmosphere for the Big 12. Like, all the West Coast schools coming in, I think will hopefully learn how good Kansas City is. Like, you just spend a couple days there. You go to the quarterfinal day, go to the semifinal day, and if you don't fall in love with it, then I just don't know if you like basketball, because it's just so great. So I hope they keep it in Kansas City, because I don't know, I don't know a better place for it. So
yeah, do you have any like strong opinions on like barbecue or anything, or any good places in Kansas City?
Not a whole lot, really. I haven't gone out to eat that much in KC, but I'm a big fan of barbecue. Kansas City barbecue's great. I don't know if I have a favorite, because I grew up around here, lived in Kansas a little bit. I don't remember the places that we would go. But
gotcha. Yeah, because we were kind of in a debate when we were going to the bowl game for Memphis, whether it was Memphis barbecue versus Kansas barbecue or Kansas City barbecue, just because it's like,
yeah, I'm biased, but I would probably say Kansas barbecue is better.
That's good. We might have to pick some up.
I mean, the place that we went to in Memphis was pretty good, but I mean, especially hearing from guys like Jalen Knoll from Iowa State, hearing how good Kansas City barbecue is, we'll definitely have to check it out before we take off back to Ames.
Yeah, and I mean, we're getting pretty big into like the food stuff. We've been doing the Big 12 eats.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if there's any of those that stuck out to you.
I didn't try any actually, but what was your guys? You guys have any standouts?
Well, actually, the Big J's mac and cheese was definitely. I mean, it was my favorite for sure. I don't know about Christian's. From what we tried so far,
it was by far my favorite.
Love that. I love to hear that.
something about mac and cheese and barbecue just.
Oh, it's yeah.
Just does me good.
Doesn't get better. They got rid of the Wabash Cannon dog or whatever.
Oh, don't even get us started. Our editor in chief has been talking about that like all week.
Yeah.
But
sad to see it go.
Yeah. Well, you gotta go out with the old to come back with the new.
Yeah. There you go.
Yep. As we saw from Houston, you know. And speaking of, I mean, we talked about Iowa State and Baylor, but what do you think of this like Houston Texas Tech matchup? Because this is one that's, as much as I want to say like Houston's just gonna roll through Texas Tech honestly surprised me against BYU.
Yeah, Texas Tech has been really impressive this year. I mean, obviously Kansas went into that game in Lubbock super short-handed and on a short rest and got absolutely mollywopped. But, I mean, they've been really good. First-year coach Grant McCaslin has done a great job. They have they have a star in Pop Isaacs. But I think Houston is far and away the best team in the country right now. I mean, their defense is so good. They have good enough guard play, really experienced. So I can't see Houston losing. I'd be really surprised.
And I feel like in every matchup, like when you think for anyone to beat Houston, it's going to take, just getting, getting out of that defense, getting them out of their usual rotations, their usual spots, but no one has really been able to do it. I mean, they have 3 losses on the year, and the Iowa State one, you could arguably say that they could have won that game as well. So I think I like that you bring it up. They're just a different animal in the Big 12. Mm-hmm. Their defense is something that no one has really been able to get around, and I feel like no matter who plays them in the championship game, I mean, I feel like Iowa State could give them a good game, kind of like they did when they went down to Houston, but ultimately Houston's going to be a 1 seed. They're going to go far in the tournament.
Yeah, the only team that comfortably beat Houston was Kansas, and it took a 70% effort from the floor. The best. I mean, I think they game planned really well for the Houston game, and they were able to show some things on offense, but I mean, granted, it's still like they still put up like 78 points in that game despite shooting 70% from the floor and only won by 13. So I mean, Houston's just they are very, very good.
And I feel like they're one of Houston's a team where they don't have the best offense in the league. I probably wouldn't even say they have a top 5 offense, even with how experienced they are. But it's going to be really hard to just outwork them offensively when their defense is so good.
Yeah, and they're really, really good on the offensive glass too. Mm-hmm. So even if like they're not super efficient, they get extra chances. And Jamal Shedd is super good. Yeah. LJ Cryer, when he's hot, is one of the best guards in the country, probably, just in terms of scoring. So they have all the pieces. They could win it all, and I would probably pick them to win it all right now if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I feel like Shedd did everything to deserve his player of the year, his defensive player of the year. I mean, he was just unbelievable, and he was not only like unbelievable consistently, he was also clutch when they needed him to be that. And I mean, you look at that going into the NCAA tournament, and it's hard to see like any team competing well, especially against that defense.
Yeah, I feel like some people have said it depends on like the whistle they get. Obviously, they play a super physical defense, so if they get into a game that's a lot of fouls are being called, they get into foul trouble. It's like the only way I could see them going out early.
Yeah, that's kind of...
Other than that, it's like they're most likely going to make a super deep run.
That's true. I kind of see that the same way as with Iowa State as well, where they also play a similarly physical defense to the point where like yesterday, even against Kansas State, a lot of whistles were called, and they still did power through that. But, I mean, if Iowa State, which doesn't tend to be great from the free throw line, isn't hitting their free throws, then, I feel like the other team can run away with it from the line. So
yeah, it's tough when you have these super physical defenses, because the Big 12, I feel like at times does a good job of refereeing where it's like they'll let you play a little bit, but then obviously you get some games where it's like everything is being called a foul, and it takes a lot of rhythm out of offenses. It makes the game tough to sit through. So it'll be interesting to see how these Big 12 defenses come to play in March, just with different refereeing crews.
Yeah, I am interested to see how like the conferences clash, just because, I mean, we were talking about how some of these teams feel almost upset proof in the first round just because you put like a Big 12 defense against like some of these mid-major teams. I feel like they're going to have a rough day. Yeah,
it depends on the mid-major. Like, as someone who's watched Kansas all year, if they face a mid-major who chucks a lot of threes, they could definitely lose. I mean, you saw that with BYU. They've struggled to guard the 3 all year. But yeah, against some of the other teams, it's like it's going to be hard for those just teams who haven't gone against it. Like, you have a little bit of prep, 3 or 4 days maybe, but I mean, it's hard to get ready for a defense like Iowa State's or Houston's.
Yeah, and I mean, it'll be interesting to see like some of these conferences that rely a lot on just like high scoring offenses, seeing how they even match up against like defenses in the Big 12, because I mean, even some of the lower teams, like, I mean, Kansas State is, obviously trying to make their case for the tournament. But if they get in, their defense could honestly get them through the first round just by itself.
Yeah, it could. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they'll make it in. We'll have to see. But yeah, it's a possibility for sure.
That's true. Enough with the kind of Kansas State tournament talk. I mean, we can go into just our lives as student reporters. I mean, you said you're in your second year then.
Yeah.
And do you have any like favorite moments just covering any of the beats you were on?
Yeah, last year, second semester, I was on the women's beat a lot. And granted, them missing the tournament was pretty bad, but they ended up getting to play the WNIT in Allen Fieldhouse. I got to cover all of those games. So that was really fun, just seeing, them bring, I mean, a Kansas team bringing home a championship in Allen Fieldhouse was really cool. And then this year, obviously, Kansas making the bowl game, getting to go to that, and them winning that game was a really cool experience. And then just everywhere, I was able to go to Assembly Hall, Hilton, so 2 really good college basketball environments. Was super blessed to be able to do that. So those are probably like the best things that I could come up with.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in kind of the same boat. Last year I covered the women's basketball team, and I was at the Big 12 tournament when they won it, and that was definitely kind of like a surreal experience just because, I was there when the confetti was falling. We were on the court with them for probably like half an hour afterwards. And I mean, it's just kind of cool to see them kind of win something because obviously at Iowa State, kind of rarely does it happen. I mean, the men's side does kind of win the Big 12 tournament considerable amount of times.
Yeah.
But then we were also had the pleasure to go to Memphis for the Liberty Bowl. Although Iowa State didn't really play that well, it was still being able to go somewhere to cover a sport is always fun to me.
Yeah, I mean, Tyler was talking about that on a podcast that we recorded before this, and that's the best part is kind of getting out of your environment and going somewhere and realizing like this is my job, like this is one of the coolest things ever. I remember like one of the coolest parts about being a journalist for me and like why I loved doing it was when Iowa State upset Houston. They stormed the court for that game, or no, it was a different one. But
Kansas.
yeah, when
They did storm the court against Kansas.
I forgot about that.
It's all good. Yeah.
But just stuff like that was like, wow, Iowa State is unranked. They beat, number 2 Houston, and then also like, I mean, we've gone from traveled to Iowa City where we get locked in the softball stadium and then or we go to Memphis or Cincinnati. So the trips are long, but it's definitely the best part is kind of when you're the beat reporter really just traveling wherever the team goes and kind of getting like a real feel as a student about like what your job's going to be in 2-3 years, whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, some of the travel, like even not even going to the games, but the travel to the games has been really fun, because there's a decent amount of student media population at Kansas, so get 4 or 5 buddies in a car and drive up to Bloomington, which we did for the Indiana game, was a ton of fun. So it's great. I mean, I love like student journalism. It's super sick getting to cover Kansas football and Kansas basketball in college is like a crazy thing to think about. So it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. And then I guess have you covered like any beats or random sporting events for your paper where besides just like basketball or football?
I'm a really big baseball guy, so I did a good amount of baseball last year. I'll do more baseball after the basketball season ends. So that's something I'm really excited for because I love baseball. Kansas baseball has been a little bit better this year. I know obviously Iowa State doesn't have a baseball program.
Yep, I was going to say.
But yeah, when I first started, I think the first thing I wrote was like women's golf. So
I started out with men's golf. So
yeah, I did men's and women's golf. Yeah, I think I did a soccer game too. So, I mean, I've done a little bit of everything. Obviously, football, basketball, baseball are probably my 3 favorites though.
Yeah, speaking of soccer, we were actually short-staffed at the beginning of this year, so didn't have any soccer reporters. So me and Logan had to take that one on while also covering football. And that was actually, we went up to Iowa City, and that's where we got locked into the stadium.
That's sick.
Had to kind of shimmy our way through a gap in the fence to get out. But it was all fun. And I know that you started on men's golf, and I started covering softball scrimmage seasons, so like not even real stuff.
Yeah,
but, I mean,
you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I always tell people. You got to start somewhere, and you just put everything into it, and obviously your hard work will pay off.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, thanks for coming on the pod. It was nice talking to you.
Yeah.
Obviously, always good to talk to like a rival paper. Kansas, Iowa State. Definitely a fun rivalry. Definitely something I'm always excited to watch, and we'll definitely have more exciting games coming in the future. So
yeah, it was a lot of fun, guys.
Yeah. So thanks for watching another episode of the Daily Dish, and join us again next time.